Jauan Jennings is available, definitely want to grab him and play him this week because San Francisco, they're going to need a lot.
5 in the pattern. Purdy stepping up. Launching it. Jennings again! A 3-touchdown performance! The day of his NFL life!
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. Today's video, we're going to talk Week 4, early preview of guys you could pick up on waivers, drop candidates, buy candidates, and sell candidates. So if you're interested in more content like this, please subscribe to my channel, like this video, comment below. If you comment, I reply to all my comments, so please take advantage of that. And I have a fan mailbag that's going to be coming up on Saturdays, so please comment if you want your questions answered on this channel. And subscribe and check out the description below if you're interested in more content. So before I get into breaking down each position like I have the past few weeks, first I want to say this was a very unusual week in fantasy football. I'm sure a lot of people were very frustrated if you played Jauan Jennings, if you sat certain players like Malik Willis. Yeah, it was a tough week for a lot of people. There's a lot of unpredictability, but that's kind of what's fun about fantasy football is that you can take advantage of things like this because ultimately this is a law of averages. There's not going to be Jauan Jennings 46-point games every single week. And if you capitalize on some of these players' values at the right time, that's how you win fantasy football. It doesn't matter who you draft, who you start your team with. It's how you build your roster through the season. So we're going to talk, just some players from my opinion that I've picked up on in the first few weeks that I would recommend that you buy, sell, and some strategies that you can do to help improve your team. I do have a video more specifically on the strategies that I'm going to release later this week, but for now, we're just going to be focusing on Week 4 and takeaways of guys you could pick up, buy, and sell, particular to this week. So we'll start with the quarterback position. My number one pickup at quarterback was not the top performing quarterback, but in my opinion, the guy with the most potential, and that's Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams has had a rough start to the season, to say the least. It has not always been pretty, but I did really like the progress that he showed today. Finally got his first 2 touchdowns in the season, so that's great. He still has a problem with turnovers, which is expected for a rookie, especially if somebody his age. But the guy does have a ton of potential. 363 today, threw the ball 52 times. Just the ability of a team to trust somebody with that much volume shows that they do trust him. And he does have a lot of weapons on this team. Today it was Rome Odunze and Cole Kmet that broke out, but they're going to have some good matchups later on in the season that as he gets more comfortable, he's going to get better and he's going to put up better numbers. So I would purely pick him up as my number one QB option, if nothing else, to just stash him and see how he does. I think depending on the quarterback you have right now, if you have Anthony Richardson, you may want to consider playing Caleb Williams over Anthony Richardson. But at the same time, this is a potential play. It's not necessarily a streaming play for a given week. More of the guys along those lines are Sam Darnold and Andy Dalton. I did talk about both of them briefly in my last video. And, my videos come out Sunday night, Monday morning. And with Carolina, there was the news that Bryce Young was getting benched. Andy Dalton goes in and, with news like that, you want to pay attention to some of these players because Andy Dalton, in the game that he did play a year ago, he did play well. Me personally, I did not expect anything like this that we saw today. 29-point game from Andy Dalton, 29 from Chuba Hubbard, and then Deontay Johnson, 26 in terms of full PPR. But then again, pay attention to the news like this because some of the guys in your league may have dropped players like Deontay Johnson and Chuba Hubbard. I'm going to talk on them in a little bit. But I do think that based on this game that Dalton has now thrown himself into the streaming category of guys that you can cycle in week at a time. Next week he gets Cincinnati, which is, Cincinnati struggled against New England and held up against Kansas City. I'd like to see how they do against Washington to really kind of formulate an opinion of how I feel about Andy Dalton going into that matchup. but he is an intriguing option now moving forward. And in 2 quarterback leagues, he must be rostered. Other guys that did very well, I was very impressed with Bo Nix. Not a great stat line in terms of fantasy, but like Caleb Williams, I do get the sense that he's now grasping the offense and is going to be successful as the season goes along. So if nothing else, grab him as well if you do have the availability in deep leagues. Malik Willis did very well today too. This is more of a short-lived, but I do feel comfortable now starting Malik Willis in situations where you need him, because Tennessee was supposed to be a good defense, but it's really just credit to Matt LaFleur for setting him up in positions to be successful, given some of his limitations. It was really impressive to see how he's played the last 2 games, considering how he played with Tennessee. And for Titans fans, man, that's got to be rough having a game like that today, given your quarterback play. 2 guys to stash right now. Tyler Huntley, I think there's a very high probability that he starts next week. Skylar Thompson looked pretty rough today, and he got banged up. And I really do not think they want to put Tim Boyle out there, so keep an eye on that. And then Drake Maye looked all right when he went in at the end of that Jets game for the Patriots. I would not be surprised if he gets the starting nod relatively soon, and just for upside alone, you got to stash him in 2 quarterbacks leagues is what I would recommend. All right, guys that you can drop, and this is relative to the size of the league, but there's a lot of players that have done well, but ultimately I think have fallen back into the level of streaming. For example, Baker Mayfield and Derek Carr. I put them as caveats that I do not think that you should actively try to drop them, but I do not think that you should view them as quarterbacks that you should hold the whole season, because today you saw a regression to the mean of both of these players. And I think that there's going to be matchups where they do really well, but matchups where they really struggle. And guys that you can drop, Kirk Cousins, if you're holding on to him, I do not think you need to anymore. There's guys that are doing better than him, not worth holding on to. And then Jared Goff and Trevor Lawrence were guys I talked about last week who they're just not putting up the value that you would probably draft in the mat. And they don't really give you a ton of upside because of lack of rushing ability. Who do you want to buy among the quarterback positions? And some of this is going to be a little bit of a cop-out because I talked about some of these guys last week, but I would still recommend trying to buy Josh Allen if you can. Just coming off of a 9.76 fantasy performance, that's going to get better. He's going to have more rushing carries. They were just blowing out Miami, and they frankly didn't need to use Josh Allen. So I think that he's definitely somebody that you want to try to buy the most if you can. I am still high on Jalen Hurts, even though he has not played well to start the season, because Hurts he does give you great rushing value, and he has some solid assets on his team that are one injured right now. So his numbers are going to get better, but you do like 29 of 38 today is not bad. He did have an ugly interception in the red zone that is going to be talked about. And he's not really giving you the rushing value that you would like at times. But I think overall, the floor of Jalen Hurts is higher than what he's put out so far. And he's a good player to buy that will give you some solid value moving forward, in my opinion. I would flip any of those guys I talked about in the pickups and drop categories to get Jalen Hurts in a heartbeat if I can. And then also keep an eye on Jordan Love. So managers that are 0-3, and I'm going to talk about strategies at different records in my video coming out later this week. But if you have a manager who's 0-3 and has Jordan Love, they may be more likely to part with him than you may think. And signs are pointing to him coming back in week 4. But if he doesn't, then maybe that manager might be a little more desperate and would be willing to give you Jordan Love. But if what Malik Willis has shown you so far is that Matt LaFleur is going to find ways to make these quarterbacks successful. And when Jordan Love gets back, I have full confidence that he's going to be a productive fantasy football player. Kyler Murray. I do really like Kyler Murray's floor as well as a running quarterback. He had an off day today, and I think that if you could take advantage of that, he's kind of viewed as a tier below a lot of these elite guys still. And I would be trying to get Murray off a down week while you can. And then this is a controversial take, but consider buying low on Anthony Richardson. Yes, he has been very bad the last 2 weeks, but he does have an elite offensive coordinator, offensive play caller Shane Steichen. And he does have elite rushing value. Granted, he has not been rushing as much lately. And I say all this as a caution that you do not want to give up too much for Anthony Richardson. But if you gauge the owners that have him, they're probably very frustrated and would be willing to part with him. And if you have the ability to afford to hold on to him, I think that's worth it. Sadly, he's kind of turned into this year's version of Justin Fields, where he has all this hypothetical value, but turnovers are ultimately limiting his ability to actually be successful. But I do feel that this will change as the season goes along. He's in a rut right now, but just the law of averages says that this guy's going to figure it out. And I would be willing to bet that just based on the athletic freak that he is. If he can get those turnovers under control, I think that there's a lot of potential to be had there. Who are guys that you want to sell? So as I mentioned earlier, all the guys that are in that streaming category, Darnold, Baker Mayfield, Derek Carr, who have started out the season very well, if you could flip them for one of these higher value rushing quarterbacks, I would do that. And yes, I would do that for Anthony Richardson. I know that sounds crazy right now, but the hypothetical value of Anthony Richardson is so much higher than these players. And Darnold, Baker, and Carr are essentially all kind of the same player that you can find on waivers. But you cannot find a guy like Anthony Richardson on waivers who can rush for 50 yards and a touchdown, but also throw 70-yard bombs, 300 touchdowns, things like that. So that type of quarterback does not exist on waivers generally. So I would be willing to trade one of those guys to stash Richardson on my bench and then hold the value of a streamer to start in the meantime until Richardson gets his stuff together. That's my personal opinion there. And then Andy Dalton is kind of in the same situation because everybody is really high on him right now because of how he played. But I'm telling you that this is not a typical Andy Dalton performance if you're not familiar with fantasy football or the NFL in general. This is one game. So the law of averages says that Andy Dalton is not going to continue to play like this. This is the ideal time to capitalize on that if you can. And then I've already talked about Patrick Mahomes, but just out of name value alone, you can get a lot of value for him that I think ultimately Mahomes is not giving you the elite level upside for. He did have a little bit better of a game today, but over his first 3 games, he's put up 15, 12, and 16 fantasy points in each week in a standard scoring format, which is just not cutting it for somebody that you draft that high. And then Dak Prescott, great game today, number 1 QB on the week. I do think that he will be a good fantasy quarterback, but I do think if you can get that elite upside of a running quarterback like Allen, Hurts, Love, or Murray, as I mentioned earlier, I would trade Dak for them in a heartbeat. All right, so let's go to the running back position now. And running back is the biggest standout from this week is Chuba Hubbard. Chuba Hubbard was likely dropped in a lot of leagues, but incredible game today that really has catapulted him back into the discussion among potential must-start options. 21 carries, 114. He got a receiving touchdown on 5 receptions for 55 yards. That's 26 touches in a game. You love that kind of volume. He's clearly proven that he is the option ahead of Miles Sanders. And as long as he's getting this type of volume for the foreseeable future until Jonathan Brooks is out, you have to capitalize on this. And I think that Chuba Hubbard is a must start. So if he's out there on waivers, that would be your number 1 priority out there for me. I personally would prioritize him over any of the receiving options that are out there as well, except for the potentially of maybe Deontay Johnson. I think I would have Johnson over Hubbard if they're both out there. But these are pretty significant fab dumps, in my opinion, at least 30%, because these guys are going to be significantly involved on this team based on what we saw today. And other guys that you want to look at among running backs, to me, the number 2 guy that I would pick out is more likely available is Bucky Irving. In terms of how that Tampa Bay backfield has looked, Rachaad White, who I'm going to talk about in a little bit, has not been very impressive. But Bucky Irving today looked far more explosive, 9 for 70. He also had 3 receptions, a total of 11.4. This guy is not breaking out for touchdown yet, but the way the backfield is trending is that it's getting to a committee and possibly something that Bucky Irving could take advantage of and claim the backfield as his own. So try to take advantage of that now while he still hasn't broke out. You could probably still get him for a pretty insignificant amount of fab to get him on your roster. Other guys that I like that are hypotheticals, and these guys all kind of fall into the same position as guys that I would like to have. Chase McLaughlin, Jaleel McLaughlin. I'm confusing it with the kicker. But anyway, so Jaleel McLaughlin, Rico Dowdle, and Roshon Johnson. So all three of those players are all have teams that need someone to step up into that running back role, and they seem to have the path to take advantage of that right now. McLaughlin had a really nice move today to get a touchdown. Rico Dowdle has not looked great, but he is clearly starting to look to be the more featured back as opposed to Zeke Elliott. And then Roshon Johnson, who's kind of snuck in as that third running back, but DeAndre Swift is just not cutting it right now. These are all guys that I would stash if you can. I don't think you have to put down really much of any fab, but I think they all have good upside. Personally, I think Dowdle has the most upside of those. But then next I would go McLaughlin and then Roshon Johnson, personally. And then guys you could drop. So I've been high on Jaylen Warren, but just very disappointing game today, and he just simply does not seem to be getting the volume. And also, like, Arthur Smith has some kind of man crush on Cordero Patterson that I don't really understand, but that's now interfering with Jaylen Warren, so I think you can move on from him. Javonte Williams, brutal fumble today, also just looking rough in general. I think you just got to move on from that whole situation. A lot of potential there, but just never lived up to it. Cam Akers, and I was wrong on this. I said that he was a good pickup for this week. And to me, like, if he's going to put up the performance that he did today with full volume, whenever Joe Mixon comes back, which appears to be soon, I don't think that Akers can be reliable. And then Raheem Mostert, which I would not try to drop if you can, but just the way Miami is looking and that Mostert has struggled with injuries, I don't think you have to hold on to him if you need a spot to fill. Who are guys that you want to buy? So the number one guy that I would try to buy among the running back positions is Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara is going to be very hard to buy, but what I love about today is that he got 26 carries. His carries go up every single week. This is pretty incredible for somebody who is, I believe, 29 years old. Didn't really have a super productive day today, but the Eagles did play a good defensive game. He had 3 receptions, only 15 full PPR points. But you love this volume from somebody like Alvin Kamara, and he's going to be featured on this team. That new Clint Kubiak offense, and I do think you're going to see some regression back to what you've seen the last few weeks of 20-plus performances. I like him as an easy top 10 running back rest of the season. If there's any way that you could buy him now, I would recommend doing that. Other guys, Achane, kind of in the same situation. He started off the season very well, but I think that he will have more involvement. This game was just kind of a debacle, and I think they're going to improve the quarterback position, as I've mentioned, in the future weeks, and I think Achane will do better. So take advantage of this down week while you can, because a lot of people are going to be very down on the Dolphins as a whole after this performance today. Josh Jacobs struggled today, kind of the same thing there, especially when Jordan Love comes back. You're not going to have as much rushing threats from the quarterback position that limited Jacobs' value today. And then Kenneth Walker coming back from injuries. But a very sneaky buy candidate that a lot of people have probably forgotten about is Jonathan Brooks, out with the knee injury. So you probably don't have to put as much in to try to buy him, but I do think he is a good player to get because what Carolina showed today is that they do have a competent offense with Andy Dalton. And if Jonathan Brooks can come back, remember, this was a guy that had backed up B. John Robinson at Texas and arguably did better than him last year. So I think that just the potential of that alone, somebody that's on IR right now, he could be a huge steal late in the season to pick up. That's not going to cost you that much. Guys that you can sell. So the number one guy I would try to sell is Rachaad White. Struggled in this game. Has not been great this season, but he does have some pedigree from his previous season that you could still try to sell the managers on. This is a guy that was going in the 3rd, 4th round. Maybe you could get some value out of that. Hopefully you did sell Ramondre Stevenson, like I said before. After a game like today, I still put him in the sell category even after how he started the season. He's still, I believe, in the top 20 of running backs, so he's another guy that I would put in there. Other guys that I would try to sell. So Jerome Ford, I do like Jerome Ford, but I ultimately think that this offense is just so limited by Deshaun Watson. A lot of injuries on the offensive line today. I think that this is a good time to try to sell Jerome Ford if you can. And then J.K. Dobbins, who I've not talked about explicitly as a sell candidate, but I've mentioned it in my comments with viewers, is that he is a good sell candidate because he has started the season extremely well. But ultimately, this guy has a track history of getting injured. And this was kind of a bad game by his standards today with only 44 rushing yards. He's going to have some better games moving forward. But heading into this upcoming matchup with Kansas City in week 4 and then a bye, this is probably a good time to try to sell him for his maximal value if you can. Try to convince the owners off those first 2 performances to bite. And then another guy, Devin Singletary, has not been great this season. And he does get volume, which I do like, but he's just not been very efficient with it. And I think that as the season progresses, he did get a touchdown today, but I just think that this is a very limited player who's ultimately not really going to make the difference for you between winning a championship or not. So I would try to flip Singletary as part of a package deal that you can get in a trade to improve your team at the running back position or at another flex position. All right, wide receiver. So the big wide receiver today, the performance that busted everybody's brackets and ultimately resulted in winning and losing for most of you, is Jauan Jennings. Just an incredible game today. He had 3 touchdowns. I said to pick him up, as you saw in my intro, but I was not expecting this type of performance. 12 targets, 11 receptions, 175 and 3. I don't know if there's ever been a game where Debo or Brandon Ayuk has done this, which is incredible. But that's going to lead into my discussion about Ayuk in a little bit, which I'll get to shortly. But Jauan Jennings' best performance on the week. He is not my number 1 pickup, though. My number 1 pickup, if he is out there, is Deontay Johnson. I really like what I saw from Deontay Johnson now that he has a competent quarterback play. He had, I believe, 14 targets, 8 receptions, 122 and 1. And on top of that, Adam Thielen has a hamstring injury. So now this guy, the door is wide open for him to be the leading receiver on this team. And I think that he has pretty much catapulted himself into must-start category. I am going to be starting him with full confidence next week. So if he's out there, that would be a full fad dump, as I've already mentioned. Other guys that I do like, sneaky players that you can get are Jalen Tolbert and Jalen Nailor for the Cowboys and Minnesota Vikings, respectively. Both those players have done very well. Jalen Nailor has scored a touchdown in every game this season. Not a big fan of the target volume that he's getting, but if nothing else, he could be a good player that you can grab and then try to flip in a trade. But he is stepping up as that number 2 receiver in a very good Minnesota team. And then for Jalen Tolbert, I think this guy actually has great value to hold on to rest of the season because Dallas is really in need of that number 2 receiver. And, I like that performance against New Orleans more where he had 9 targets. But today, 3 for 42, a touchdown, another great catch today. I think that this guy has real potential to step into that number 2 role and would be a great pickup that you can get. Other guys that I like that have potential are Michael Wilson for Arizona. A lot of targets today. I think that he's really stepping up as a number 2 receiver on that team. And then, after McBride and Harrison, it's the number 2 wide receiver, third target. And then Mike Williams for I almost wanted to say Green Bay because of Aaron Rodgers, but for New York, he, I think, has a lot of potential to step up as well. He's starting to get more involved in that system where we're starting to see the Jets performing better overall as a team. Performances that I'm not really reading into as much. So the big one was Trey Tucker for Las Vegas did well, but a lot of That was a very unusual game where they kind of had a garbage time script that caught them up. I'd like to see, just another performance like this before I'm really that interested in grabbing him and putting fab down on him. Alec Pierce has come back to earth a little bit, but he's somebody to consider just based on his volume that he's gotten so far. Calvin Austin had a good game today, but again, not really the volume I would like. And Juju is somebody that I would avoid. He got a touchdown today, and he may get some hype because of his name value, but I just would not go there personally. Drop candidates, Brandon Cooks, because looking at this Dallas Cowboys team, they're featuring Jalen Tolbert more, and Turpin is kind of starting to step up as that third receiver. So Cooks, I think you can safely drop him. Jalen Polk of the Patriots, just not a lot of upside with that receiving core in general. Rams wide receivers as a whole were disappointing. I was expecting Demarcus Robinson to have a better game, but ultimately, these Rams players, I think without Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, everybody else is just kind of thrown into this mesh of bleh, and it's just not good for fantasy. And then Jahan Dotson, liked his potential coming over to Philly, but I just don't think that it's really going to work out for him at this point. So who are guys that I would buy at the wide receiver? So I'm going to lump all these guys into the tier A category. CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Ayuk, Jamar Chase, and Tyreek Hill. And I've kind of talked about this a week ago, so I won't spend too much time on this. But these guys are all off to slow starts this season. And maybe you put Hill in a category below because of the quarterback play. But I do expect that all of these guys will have better seasons to conclude the rest of this fantasy football season. And now is the time to buy low on them because we're all struggling. And, you would be surprised. The number one name that I'm going to throw out there, and I'm going to talk about him in a little bit, is Malik Neighbors. I would trade Malik Neighbors for all of these guys personally because at the end of the day, Malik Neighbors is a rookie. And yes, he's looked great so far. But those four have a proven track record of being elite. And I would be willing to give up Malik Neighbors for that. Other guys that are very interesting as well, for different reasons. Garrett Wilson off to a slow start. I don't quite put him in the same category as those other guys, but I do think that he's a great grab. That's a buy low. Zay Flowers is a good buy low as well. And then I want to mention Rashee Rice because he is not any means a buy low because he had a great game today. But I do think that this guy has put himself into the category of that elite top 10 wide receivers that if you can buy him and flip a name like, Davante Adams or something like that, I don't think that's really realistic at this point. But basically my point with him is that I think that he is not a name recognition guy that was drafted late, but you can get him. I think that's a great buy low candidate that you can trade some name value for. He's still kind of flying under the radar a little bit, probably not for that long, but he would be a great player to buy low on relative to his hype and name brand value. Other guys that I like that you can buy low on that have struggled. So I mentioned Amari Cooper in my last video. Not really a buy low now because he had a great game today. But then Mike Evans, Michael Pittman, and Terry McLaurin are all ones on their team. But they're just had some... Mike Evans had a great first game, but disappointing. And then Pittman and McLaurin have been relatively disappointing throughout the season. They're both guys that you could pick up that I think would be good value just because they're going to have some more target involvement as the season goes along. And then more sneaky guys to pick up. JSN struggled today, but I do think that he's going to have some involvement moving forward. Very athletic receiver that I think you don't have to give up that much for. And then Christian Watson has struggled so far, but when Jordan Love comes back, I do believe that he is going to have a breakout and be a good guy that you can have on your roster. So now is the time to probably take advantage of that before Jordan Love comes back. Sell candidates, as I mentioned, Malik Neighbors is a good sell candidate because he is playing great and he is the number one overall wide receiver after week 3. But ultimately, there's a lot of questions in terms of one, he's a rookie, and is some of this contributed to defenses still trying to learn how he plays, stuff like that. 2, he has Daniel Jones as his quarterback. So that's another consideration. And I mean, this guy does have a lot of volume to the point that I think that he is a must-start receiver rest of season, and probably is going to finish as a top 20 wide receiver. But ultimately, if you could choose between having him or somebody like CeeDee Lamb, I think it's a pretty easy CeeDee Lamb, despite the numbers that have been put up so far by him. because at the end of the day, he's still a rookie. There's still a lot of variables and unknowns, and CeeDee Lamb has a track record of being a lead for several years now that I think you want to take the known relative to this unknown hype. And then Jawan Jennings, obviously, if you could flip him off this one game, that would be incredible, and I think there's a good chance to do that, but you've got to pounce on that now because I'm telling you he's not going to do this again next week. This is going to get a little bit more into guys that I would sell rather than sell high, but Jalen Waddle and Tank Dell are both guys that were drafted pretty high in the 5th round and have been underwhelming. I do think that today would be a good day to try to sell Tank Dell because he did do better today. He had about 11.5 fantasy points, I believe. I have to double check the exact number. But he is clearly the 3rd wide receiver on that team, and just the opportunities are not going to be there. So if you could sell somebody on, how he did last year when he was the number 1 on that team and, the hype that some people have about him, I would try to do that because I don't think that he is going to be an asset that is going to give you the value that you got him for. So you might as well try to get what value you can before he puts up more bad performances. And then kind of the same lines with Jalen Waddle, but his is more so due to the limitations at quarterback, as I've already talked about, and injuries. So, yeah, these guys I think you got to move on from. Whether you're selling them at the value you'd like to or not, it's a good time to move on. Guys that did well today that I would try to sell, DeAndre Hopkins, Deontay Johnson, who I just mentioned, and Rome Odunze. They all had great games today, but I do think that for all of these players, it's not representative of their typical values. So I would try to sell them. And speaking of which, DJ Moore would be a good player to try to buy on the Bears because just track record and proven history, I think that DJ Moore is going to have better games moving forward. Rome Odunze, more question marks when you get Keenan Allen back. Rashid Shaheed and Alec Pierce, who I've talked about before, these are both sell candidates because I do not think that they are reliable players in fantasy football. And as you saw from Shaheed, he had a down week. So you could sell them off how they did in the first 2 weeks and try to see what you can get. That's what I would recommend doing. And then just the streaky guys in general, I would not be actively trying to sell them, but based on what we've seen so far, Jameson Williams, Xavier Worthy, and Calvin Ridley are all very streaky, a lot of up and downs, boom or bust type of performances. I think that I personally try to go for more consistency. So I would rather have Deontay Johnson than these 3, to be honest, rest of season. But I do think that there's value in holding on to them, but I'd try to get more consistent play if I were you. Tight ends. So we'll kind of start to move a little more quickly through this. Big performance today, Cole Kmet. This is another one I didn't see coming because Cole Kmet is very up and down. But this kind of rapport with Caleb Williams you like to see. And maybe he could be stepping up as a good tight end option. So I would definitely try to recommend picking him up first, but I wouldn't make it a fab dump because of his inconsistency that he's shown through his career. Depending on the Sam Laporta injury, you may want to roster Brock Wright. He's been productive at times for Detroit. Not going to give you nearly the volume that Laporta did in his heyday last year, but Laporta's not giving you much this year, so sometimes it might not be a bad flyer if you're a Laporta owner to just grab his handcuff. And then Noah Fant, decent game today, 6 for 60, but I'm not really looking to start him. It's just something to keep an eye on and maybe stash if you have space. Drop candidates. Hunter Henry sadly followed up his great performance last week with an absolute dud on Thursday night, and I think that he's fallen into the streaming category that you don't need to roster him anymore. Evan Ingram, his injury, I think you don't need to roster him right now. Dalton Schultz, not living up to it. Colby Parkinson, not living up to it. Guys that you could buy. Brock Bowers, I would still try to buy despite this performance. I don't need to really talk about that because I discussed it last week. Dalton Kincaid is kind of in that same vein of players that have struggled so far out the gate, but I do think that there is a pathway for Kincaid getting a lot of volume on this team in terms of the pass catching. I would try to buy on that if I can. And then another guy that I would recommend trying to buy who did have a good performance today, but I still think is a very good buy candidate is Jake Ferguson. 6 for 95 off 11 targets. This team, as I said, they need someone to be a number 2 option behind CeeDee Lamb. And based on what we've seen from the Cowboys, they can't run the ball. They need to pass. So this is going to lead to options for guys like Jake Ferguson to break out. And I would make him the number 1 pickup if he's out there, but I would definitely make sure that he is somebody that I'm trying to buy on my team as well. So who would I try to trade? I would try to trade Kyle Pitts still. As I've said, I just don't think he's consistent. 2 for 50-something today. It's just, I don't like seeing 2 targets in general for tight ends. So I'm still have my worries about him. Dallas Goedert had a great game today and was excellent if you played him. But I think that when A.J. Brown is healthy and when Devontae Smith is going to be healthy, this guy's role is going to go back to being pretty minimal. So I would try to take advantage of that now off a great game. And then the big name guys like Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews, I would at this point try to see if I could trade them for some of these guys I mentioned like Kincaid and Ferguson, because I think that it's just more name value than production right now. And then Isaiah Likely is somebody I would still try to sell him off his performance from week 1. And like I've said, it's going to be harder now that he's followed it up with some bad games, which is 1 for 4 today. But just showing that week 1 was a fluke. He's arguably droppable as well. So defenses to look into streaming for this week. So first of all, if Minnesota is out there, I would grab them. They're a great defense, number 1 overall. And they do get Green Bay next week, which is tough. And then they do have a bye in week 5. So just consider that if you're looking to pick them up. But the number 1 that I would like to get if I can, that is probably potentially still out there, is Chicago. They get the Rams next week, which have a lot of injuries. Then they get Carolina, which, Carolina look better, but let's see how they look in 2 weeks. And Jacksonville, which are 3 very good opponents. And I think that this is a Bears unit that generates turnovers, very good under Matt Eberflus. I think that this is a good stretch of games that if you pick them up now, you can probably hold them for the next 3 weeks. That could be one of those defenses that can help revive your if you started 0-3, it can help you get back to 3-3, kind of get on the right track there. And then other 1 week options to look at, kind of both ways. Tennessee and Miami, I think, are both offenses that are struggling and could be good defenses against each other. Cincinnati playing Carolina, I think that's a solid option to look at as well. And then Houston at Jacksonville. So among those options, who would I pick? I would go Miami first and then Houston, but those other 2 are Cincinnati and Tennessee are worth looking into as well. Like I said, please comment in the description below if you want to have your question answered in a fan mailbag. I'm going to leave a comment pinned, and if you reply to that comment, it will be answered probably Saturday. So just keep an eye out for that. And then check out my video that's going to be coming out this week on strategies to help win a fantasy football championship. Well, thank you for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.